She was the harmony behind the powerhouse, the velvet voice beside the fire. While Reba McEntire lit up arenas, Linda Davis stood just to the left, smiling, steady, unforgettable to anyone truly listening, yet somehow forgotten by the rest. For decades, she blended perfectly into someone else's spotlight, singing songs that made people cry, but walking off stage to silence. She wasn't the star. She wasn't the headliner. She was the other voice. And now, at 61, after years of applause that never had her name on it, Linda Davis is finally ready to speak. This isn't just a story about backup vocals. It's about the invisible labor of harmony, the emotional cost of proximity to fame, and the strength it takes to reclaim your voice after the world has trained you to whisper. This is Linda Davis's story, the one they never told, and the one she's finally telling herself. Before the Grammy, before Does He Love You, before standing beside country music royalty, Linda Davis was just a small-town Texas girl with a voice too big for her zip code. She was born in Dodson, a place where the dust hung in the air and dreams usually didn't make it past the county line. Her family didn't have much, but they had a radio, and that was enough. While other kids were learning their ABCs, Linda was learning Dolly Parton's phrasing. By 6 years old, she was already leading hymns at church, her voice rich, haunting, and startlingly mature. People didn't know what to make of her, this tiny girl with a grown woman's voice who could bring the entire congregation to tears on a Sunday morning. Her parents believed in her, but belief only went so far in East Texas. There were no music scouts, no talent managers hiding behind pews, just grit, long drives, and a hope that maybe, just maybe, someone out there would notice. Linda did what so many girls with oversized talent and no roadmap had to do. She waited. She sang wherever she could. At school assemblies, county fairs, parking lot shows judged by bored PTA moms and retired football coaches. But her voice never blended in. It cut through everything. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. Linda didn't sing to impress. She sang like she needed to speak. After high school, she packed up and left Dodson for Nashville. No backup plan, no rich uncle in the industry, just faith in a voice that had gotten her this far. She worked odd jobs, sang on demo tapes for $20 a track, and took late-night gigs in half-empty bars. She lived in cheap apartments, shared cars with strangers, and learned quickly which men in the industry actually cared about music and which only cared about charm. But through it all, she kept showing up, voice polished and unwavering. People started noticing. Writers, producers, the folks who mattered. She was never flashy, never demanding, but she had something rare. She could deliver emotion on command. Joy, heartbreak, regret. Her voice didn't mimic those feelings. It was those feelings. Then came the call, a spot on Reba McEntire's tour, not for fame, not for glory, but to sing harmony. And Linda said yes, not knowing it would change everything and cost more than she ever imagined. The first time Linda Davis met Reba McEntire, it wasn't some dramatic, starlit audition or big stage moment. It was quiet, a rehearsal room, a worn-out microphone, and a moment that changed Linda's life. Reba listened to her sing and simply said, "That's the voice. No fuss, no ego, just instinct." What Linda didn't realize then was that she wasn't just being hired as a backup singer. She was being chosen to step into something sacred. In 1991, Reba's world had shattered when a plane crash took the lives of most of her band. It wasn't just a professional loss. It was personal. It left a silence that felt too loud. Linda Davis walked straight into that void. She joined the tour not as a replacement, but as a salve. Her voice didn't overshadow. It softened, it supported, it healed. She became the steady presence in a world still learning how to breathe again. Reba didn't need flash. She needed trust. And Linda, humble, poised, and unshakable, became that trust. The two weren't best friends, but they were kindred spirits in their professionalism, in their understanding of what it meant to be underestimated, to be counted out before ever being counted in. Together, They created a harmony that felt more lived in than rehearsed, like two voices born from the same ache. Then came Does He Love You? The song needed fire and restraint, tension and vulnerability. The label wanted Reba to duet with a bigger star, someone more marketable. But Reba said no. She wanted Linda, not because of fame, but because of feeling. And when the song hit the airwaves, it didn't just climb the charts, it became an event. The music video burned with betrayal. The live performances were explosive. And when it won the Grammy, Linda stood beside Reba on that stage, holding the statue with pride. But behind the pride was a quiet truth. In every article, Reba's name came first. In every compliment, Linda's was the afterthought. She wasn't bitter, not yet. But that night, as the cameras flashed and headlines rolled in, Linda Davis realized something she hadn't dared admit before. Being close to greatness didn't mean you got to shine in it. And that was the moment the applause started to sting. The road with Reba was dazzling, but for Linda Davis, it wasn't paved with equal light. Touring with one of country's biggest superstars meant being part of a machine. Tight schedules, sold-out arenas, and fans who screamed for the headliner, but often squinted at the names in small print. Linda showed up every night, nailed her harmonies, smiled through it all. People called her Reba's girl, handed her playbills to sign only after Reba left the room, and always asked what Reba was like off stage. Never what she was like, and Linda took it in stride. That was the job, right? You blend, you support, you don't make waves. But the cracks started showing. It wasn't one big moment. It was 1,000 small ones, like when she was passed over for interviews about the duet that changed her life, or when her own label urged her to stay in Reba's musical lane, to mimic the style fans already associated her with. Safe sells, they told her. But Linda didn't want safe. She wanted real, honest, hers. She had a solo voice too, but it was constantly muffled by the echo of someone else's spotlight. Off stage, Reba and Linda still got along. Cordial, professional, sometimes warm, but the closeness they once shared had cooled. Reba had her inner circle, her team, her world. Linda wasn't pushed out, but she wasn't exactly invited in either. And when she started talking about releasing her own music, about carving a space that was uniquely hers, she noticed the shift. Invitations stopped arriving. Ideas she pitched were put on hold. Tour set lists didn't include her newer material. Maybe next time, they'd say. But next time never came. One day, during a tour meeting, Linda asked if she could perform one of her own songs, a ballad she'd poured her heart into. The room went silent. Then came the response, "It doesn't really fit the flow." She nodded, pretending not to be hurt. But that night, staring at the taped-up set list in her dressing room, she saw it for what it was. Her name was there, but only in lowercase. Harmony, duet, background. And in that moment, something inside her shifted, not out of bitterness, but clarity. Linda Davis realized that if she wanted to be seen, really seen, she'd have to risk stepping away from the one place she had ever been noticed at all. Linda didn't storm out or make a scene. That was never her way. Instead, she honored the rest of the tour, sang every night like her soul depended on it, and smiled through the applause even when it barely reached her. But inside, she was already gone, quietly packing away the parts of herself that had once hoped the spotlight might someday tilt her way. The truth was, she wasn't leaving Reba, she was returning to herself. And that kind of departure doesn't come with confetti or cameras, it comes with silence. There was no press release, no tabloid rumors. Just one day, Linda wasn't there anymore. And for most fans, the show simply went on. Reba's legacy kept building, stronger than ever. And Linda, she went back to where it all began. Not the town, but the mindset, the one where music was personal, where she wasn't a supporting act, but the main story. She sat with that silence, let it speak, let it echo, and then slowly started writing again. Not songs for the charts, not songs for duets, songs for her, songs that hurt, songs that healed. She pitched those songs to labels, hopeful, but realistic. The response? Kind, but cold. Too heavy. Too niche. Not what your audience expects. One executive even said, "We still see you as the harmony singer." That line hit her harder than any rejection, because it wasn't about the music. It was about the narrative others had written for her. And no matter how much she tried to revise it, they kept flipping back to the same page. But Linda Davis didn't quit. She didn't throw her voice into the wind and walk away. She kept singing. Smaller gigs, dimmer lights, bars, churches, tiny theaters with sticky floors and cheap beer. Some nights, she did it all. Drove the van, set up the mic, tuned the guitar, sang to a room where nobody recognized her until "Does He Love You" hit the first chorus. And even then, most didn't know she was that voice. But slowly, something beautiful happened. The applause may have been softer, but it was finally hers. Women came up to her crying. Men shook her hand like she'd written their life story. Young girls asked her how to stay strong when the world only wants you in the background. She was no longer someone's duet partner. She was Linda, the artist, the storyteller, the survivor, the voice that once stood beside greatness, but now stood alone, unapologetically. She began to find power in the quiet, not the kind that echoes through stadiums, but the kind that sinks in, soul deep, the kind that lives in small venues, in living rooms turned into stages, in the voices of women who'd waited too long to speak. Linda Davis stopped trying to win back an industry that never truly claimed her. Instead, she claimed herself. Her lyrics grew sharper, more personal, not marketable maybe, but real. They weren't about proving she could still sing. They were about proving she had something to say, about motherhood, about faith, about the cost of being the second voice in every story. She began performing at churches and intimate shows where the audience was close enough to see the tears in her eyes, to feel the weight in her delivery. There was no label telling her what songs to pick, no image to maintain, no pressure to compete, just her voice and the truth. And in that truth, she found her people, not masses, but the right ones. The women who said, "That song saved me." The fans who drove 3 hours just to hear her sing a track they couldn't find on the radio. The daughters who dragged their moms to shows saying, "You have to hear her live." And then, as if fate finally decided to pay attention, something full circle happened. Her daughter, Hillary Scott, who had grown up backstage while Linda blended into the shadows of another woman's spotlight, rose to her own kind of fame with Lady A. Suddenly, Linda was standing on stage again, but this time beside her daughter. And this time, it was different. There was no tension, no hierarchy, no invisible spotlight dividing them, just harmony between two women who respected each other deeply. Linda was no longer trying to be seen. She was seen by her daughter, by her audience, by herself. Together, they sang not just to entertain, but to pass down strength. Linda wasn't just reclaiming her voice, she was passing it on. She watched Hillary face the same pressures she once did, but with a different kind of courage. A courage Linda had helped shape. The music didn't need to be loud anymore to matter. It needed to be honest. And now, standing beside her daughter, Linda realized maybe she'd never truly lost the spotlight. Maybe she'd just been holding it steady for the right moment to shine. The whispers began to change. For decades, Linda Davis had been the voice people vaguely remembered but never quite placed. The woman from that duet, the harmony you felt more than heard. But now, people were talking again, and this time, they were saying her name first. Not because of Reba, not because of the Grammy, but because of her voice, her story, her resilience. Slowly, the narrative shifted. Younger artists, especially women, started reaching out, not for autographs, but for advice. They'd grown up watching her stand beside a giant and still managed to hold her own. They wanted to know how she did it, how she stayed graceful, how she survived being overlooked without letting it harden her heart. Linda didn't give them cliches. She told the truth, that sometimes strength looks like silence, but not the kind forced on you, the kind you choose, the kind that listens, watches, and waits until it's time to speak. And when it speaks, it matters. She began mentoring behind the scenes, pouring herself into young voices that reminded her of herself, hopeful, scared, and desperate to be taken seriously. She taught them what she had to learn the hard way, that you don't have to scream to be powerful, and that your worth is not defined by whose name comes first on the ticket. And the industry? It started paying attention again, but not with confetti or red carpets, with quiet reverence. Producers who once passed her over were now quoting her lyrics. Radio hosts mentioned her legacy with a tone of respect. And in small corners of country music's vast ecosystem, people began acknowledging the truth that Linda Davis had always been more than a harmony singer. She was a cornerstone, a woman who held up a generation of sound without ever asking for credit. She could have been bitter. She had every right to be. But bitterness was never her melody. Her revenge wasn't loud, it was lasting. Because while fame fades, integrity doesn't. And Linda's had been unshakable from day one. Now, when she walked into a room, any room, she didn't carry the weight of needing to prove herself. She carried a different kind of power, the kind you earn by outlasting everyone who underestimated you. There was something poetic about Linda Davis, finding her voice in the quiet places. No more massive arenas, no more screaming fans drowning her out with applause meant for someone else. These days, she stood on smaller stages, intimate theaters, songwriter circles, church halls lit by soft amber bulbs. And when she sang, you could hear every word. No smoke machines, no pyrotechnics, just her and a microphone. And suddenly the room would fall still, like everyone had been holding their breath for years, waiting for this moment. Because now, people weren't just listening, they were hearing her stories, her truth, her life. She didn't sugarcoat the road. She'd tell the crowd about the tours that drained her, the heartbreak of being passed over, the years she spent trying to feel seen. But she'd also smile when she spoke about the things that mattered more, the people who stayed, the fans who stuck around, the daughter she raised who went on to carry the music forward. Performing with Hillary wasn't just a thrill, it was a reclamation. Watching her daughter succeed reminded Linda that legacy isn't just about records or radio play. It's about resilience. It's about passing on the strength it takes to sing even when no one claps. And in those moments, when Hillary would harmonize with her on stage, Linda finally got to feel what it was like to lead the duet. Not because she was louder, but because she had built the path they both stood on. It wasn't just a full circle, it was a new beginning. For the first time, her voice wasn't being borrowed by someone else's story. It was the center of her own. Industry insiders started reaching out again, but she wasn't chasing validation. She didn't need to. She'd outgrown the game. She was writing the kind of songs that gave people permission to cry in their cars. She was mentoring girls who reminded her of the kid she once was, standing backstage, wondering if she'd ever get her own spotlight. And now, when people whispered her name, they did it with reverence, not confusion. Linda Davis had stopped waiting for a seat at someone else's table. She built her own. And this time, her name wasn't on the side. It was carved right into the center. Linda Davis no longer sings to be discovered. She sings because she knows who she is. And now, at 66, she's found a version of success that's quieter, deeper, and far more honest than the one she spent decades chasing. She's no longer trying to keep up with the machine of country music. She isn't fighting for chart positions, for radio spins, or even for validation from the same industry that once used her as the harmony to someone else's melody. What she's built now isn't flashy, but it's hers. And it's real. When she steps onto a stage now, whether it's a small-town auditorium, a songwriter festival, or a candlelit church, she's greeted with something she never fully received in her early years: recognition. Not just the kind that says, "I know your face," but the kind that says, I know your story. People don't just come for the nostalgia of Does He Love You anymore. They come because they finally understand that behind that harmony was a woman who had an entire symphony of her own, waiting to be heard. Her set lists are different now. They aren't curated to fit into someone else's tour narrative. They're her words, her melodies, her truth. She talks about the industry, but not with bitterness. She tells stories about the years she traveled with Reba, but she doesn't sugarcoat the parts where she felt invisible. She admits she lost herself. She admits there were nights she went back to her hotel room feeling like a ghost. And yet, she also talks about the fans who held her hand and told her she mattered. The young singers who email her now saying, "You helped me realize I don't need to shrink to be seen." And that might be the most important part of her legacy. Not the awards, not the collaborations, but the quiet revolution she's leading now. Linda Davis is showing the next generation that you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to become someone else's shadow just to stand in the light. You don't need to beg for a place at the table. If you keep showing up with integrity and heart, eventually, that table will come to you. Her relationship with her daughter, Hillary Scott, continues to blossom into something extraordinary. Singing with Hillary isn't just a family moment, it's a generational healing. It's Linda watching her daughter take center stage and knowing that she helped build that confidence. She didn't just raise a superstar, she raised a woman who stands tall, speaks up, and sings loud. And in those harmonies between mother and daughter, you can hear a different kind of duet, one rooted in love, sacrifice, and the refusal to be forgotten. People still ask her about Reba, and Linda still answers graciously, "We made something beautiful." But she doesn't linger there anymore, because her story didn't end when that tour did. In fact, it was only beginning. She's still writing it, through songs, through mentorship, through the life she's living on her own terms. There's something poetic about how it all came full circle. Linda Davis, the girl from Dotson, Texas, who once sang in church pews and waited for someone to notice her, is now the voice other people lean on when they need courage. She never got the explosive fame, but she got something even more rare: respect, built over time, note by note, heartache by heartache. And now, when she sings, there's a power in her that can't be denied. Because it's not about spotlight anymore. It's about freedom. It's about standing center stage and knowing she belongs there. Not as anyone's backup, not as a supporting act, but as Linda Davis, the artist, the mother, the survivor, the voice they almost missed, but didn't, not anymore.